Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually, when we talk about urban resilience or city planning, the conversation inevitably turns to hardening the city.
Right, the fortress mentality.
Exactly. You know the drill. It's bigger seawalls, stronger levees, just pouring more reinforced concrete. We tend to operate under this assumption that the only way to coexist with nature, especially water, is to just fight it with brute force.
Yeah, man versus the elements. We build a wall, the water pushes back, so we build a thicker wall. It's an endless cycle.
It's an arms race against physics. But today, we're looking at a fascinating case study that flips that logic entirely. We're going to Montreal.
Which is a brilliant example for this.
It really is. And based on our source material today, a report titled Green Island. Montreal invests in its shorelines for the future. The city is undertaking this massive strategic shift in how it handles its water's edge.
Moving away from the old ways.
Right. They're moving from gray infrastructure, so concrete and steel, to what they are calling blue resilience.
And we need to be clear right off the bat here. This isn't just about aesthetics.
No, not at all.
It's not just about making a nice park for a Sunday stroll, although, that is a great byproduct. But this is a fundamental structural engineering pivot.
A total rethink of the shoreline.
Exactly. The core idea here is that in the face of climate change, erosion, and specifically those brutal freeze-thaw cycles of the North, concrete is actually, well, it's weak. And nature, specifically vegetation, is strong.
Which is such a counterintuitive take for a major metropolis. Usually when a city planner hears vegetation, they just hear maintenance issue.
Oh, totally. They see dollar signs and landscaping crews.
Right. So let's unpack this blue resilience. Because for a city like Montreal, which is literally an island, that shoreline isn't just a border on a map. It's the front line of their interaction with the climate.
It is. And historically, Montreal treated that front line like a utility corridor.
Just a place to put things.
Yeah. If you look at the history of Montreal-North, specifically along the Rivière des Prairies, it was all factories, highways, and just these stiff, ugly concrete retaining walls.
The goal was basically just to block the water and use the land for heavy industry.
Exactly. But the data in this report shows that this gray approach is completely sizzling them now.
Right, and that's a key point in the source material. It brings up this concept of static versus dynamic infrastructure. When you build a concrete wall, it is the strongest it will ever be on the exact day you pour it.
And it degrades every single day after that.
It's a depreciating asset.
Completely. It develops these tiny microcracks, water gets in, it freezes in the winter, it expands, and the wall just crumbles.
Whereas the shift to blue resilience, this relies on what the report calls soil bioengineering.
Yes.
Soil bioengineering.
The philosophy here is that if you use living plant materials as your structural elements, the bank actually gets stronger over time. As those root systems mature, the infrastructure literally grows. Exactly. It's infrastructure that appreciates in value. It's self-healing. If a root snaps, it regrows.
So if concrete snaps, you're calling a contractor.
And paying a premium for it.
I want to get into the specific mechanics of this because the report details some really specific techniques. They aren't just, letting weeds grow wild on the riverbank. This is highly engineered.
Very calculated.
But before we get technical, give us the context on where this is actually happening. This isn't just one tiny experimental plot, right?
No, not at all. This is a systemic rollout. The report focuses heavily on Montreal-North. Like we mentioned, this area was historically neglected.
A lot of industrial runoffs.
Runoff, limited public access, and honestly just these massive concrete barriers cutting the actual people off from the water.
Which is a shame for an island city.
Right. But now they've earmarked this massive capital expenditure plan. We are talking a multi-million-dollar envelope that's fully integrated into the city's 3-year capital expenditure plan.
It's flagship-level funding.
Exactly. The report mentions a specific $1.2 million support package just to kickstart stabilizing Gowan Boulevard using these biological methods.
And when you look at the why in the report, it's really interesting. They list erosion control, sure. That's the obvious engineering goal. But they also list social equity and heat island reduction as primary drivers for this investment.
Because they are all deeply connected, you have to remember, Montreal-North is a high-density area.
Lots of asphalt.
Lots of asphalt, lots of brick, very little shade. By replacing those gray walls with green biomass, you aren't just holding back the river. You are creating a massive natural cooling system for the neighborhood.
The report notes that these vegetated banks can lower local ambient temperatures significantly compared to concrete,
Mhm.
because concrete just bakes in the sun and radiates all that heat right back at you.
It acts like an oven.
Yeah,
So this is really a public health intervention disguised as erosion control.
that is a great way to look at it. Okay, let's look at the how. Let's really dig into this soil bioengineering. Because as a listener, if you're living in a house right on the riverbank and someone tells you they're going to protect your property from a flooding river with willow branches instead of a steel wall, you might be a little skeptical.
I think anyone would be.
You need to know the physics actually work.
That is a completely fair skepticism. But let's look at the mechanics here. The report details a few key techniques, and they are chosen based on the energy of the water in that specific spot.
Right, customizing the tool for the job.
Exactly. The first one they highlight is called willow fascines.
Which, I have to say, sounds a bit like a medieval weapon. Strictly speaking, what is a fascine?
It's essentially a bundle of live branches. They usually use native willow. They tie them together into this long, tight cylinder and then partially bury it right at the toe of the slope.
The toe being the bottom part, right where the water line hits the dirt.
Right, the impact zone. Now, think about a concrete wall. A wall tries to block the water's energy. It takes the hit directly, over and over.
Which is why it cracks.
Exactly. But a fascine absorbs and dissipates that energy. It creates this physical roughness on the bank that actually slows the water down.
And the cost is fascinating. The report lists the cost of these fascines at about $150 to $350 per linear meter.
Which is quite reasonable for municipal infrastructure.
But the key metric here isn't the price. It's the lifespan. The report lists the lifespan of a willow fascine as permanent.
Because it grows.
Right.
Those branches aren't dead wood. They strike roots into the bank. They become this living rebar in the soil. They bind the earth together tighter and tighter every single year.
Living rebar. That's a great image. But what about heavier erosion? If you have serious wave action or, say, the wake from large boats going by, a bundle of sticks won't hold that, will it?
That's when you step up to the next technique, which is called brush mattresses.
Okay, brush mattresses.
This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a dense, flat carpet of live branches laid right against the slope and staked down into the mud.
And the cost for that?
The cost is a bit higher. The data shows it runs between $200 and $450 a meter, but this mattress is designed to break up heavy waves energy before it can scour the actual soil away.
It effectively armors the bank,
Yeah,
but the armor is alive.
exactly. And for areas that need basic surface protection, they use hydroseeding.
Which is much cheaper, right?
Well, much cheaper. About $15 to $35 a meter. They basically spray native seeds mixed with a natural binder over the soil to get quick ground cover.
But then there are the really extreme cases. Areas where you have high velocity currents or serious, dangerous flood risks. The report details something called vegetated riprap for those spots.
Right. Riprap being those big piles of jagged, heavy stones you usually see at ports or along highways.
That's the traditional gray method.
It is. But the vegetated part is the twist here. They use those massive interlocking stones to give that immediate heavy weight and armor to the bank. But then they plant specific vegetation deep in the gaps between the rocks.
So you get the sheer mass of the stone, plus the bounding power of the roots holding the soil underneath the stone so it doesn't wash away.
That is your heavy-duty option. That runs up to $900 a meter. But even there, at the highest end of the engineering scale, the plant is doing the crucial long-term work of stabilizing the ground beneath the rock.
What really strikes me about the budget breakdown in the report is where the money actually goes. If you look at a traditional concrete construction project, a huge chunk of the budget is just materials. Steel, cement, the trucking to get it there.
Heavy logistics.
Right. But here, the budget is completely flipped.
It is fascinating to see the numbers. You'd naturally think the plants are the big cost, but the biological materials, the willow cuttings, the dogwoods, the biodegradable geotextiles, they only make up about 35% of the project cost.
Which leaves a lot of the pie.
Exactly. Look at the labor. 30% of the budget goes directly to specialized labor.
Which makes total sense when you think about it. You can't just hire a guy with a bulldozer to scrape the earth flat and walk away.
No, absolutely not. You are essentially doing environmental gardening on a massive industrial scale. You need people on the ground who actually know how to install live cuttings so they survive.
Because it's biology. If you plant a willow fascine upside down, it dies.
It dies, the roots don't take, and your entire retaining wall fails. So this requires real environmental expertise. It creates a completely different kind of green job.
And then another 25% of the budget is just preparation, meaning excavating the old, failed concrete and digging out the contaminated fill.
Which is really the hidden cost of the gray era. You have to spend a quarter of your new budget just to undo the mistakes of the past, pulling out the rusted rebar and the toxins before you can even start to build the future.
There is also a specific line item for monitoring and maintenance, which takes up the final 10% of the budget. And this seems to be the main trade-off of blue resilience. With a concrete wall, you build it, you walk away, and ideally you forget about it until it cracks 30 years later.
Right, it's passive.
But this bioengineering requires active participation, at least for the first 2 years.
That is the critical window. You literally have to water the infrastructure.
Which is a sentence you just do not hear in civil engineering. Go water the bridge.
Exactly. Go water the retaining wall. But it's necessary. You have to ensure those roots take hold in the soil. If a plant dies in year 1, you have to go out and replace it.
But the report notes that once that root network is fully established, usually after year 2 or 3, the shoreline becomes largely autonomous. It takes care of itself.
And it does something that concrete can never, ever do. It actively manages sediment and filters runoff.
This is the environmental return on investment. We talk about the physical structure holding the land in place, but it's also actively treating the water.
Right. Think about the water running off the city streets during a rainstorm. It is full of motor oil, road salt, grit, heavy metals.
Nasty stuff.
Very nasty. But these new root systems act as a massive biological filter before that water ever hits the river. The plants capture the sediment, they trap the pollutants.
And the shade provided by the new tree canopy does something incredible too. The report says that canopy shade can lower the actual water temperature near the bank by 2 to 4 degrees Celsius.
Which, in biological terms, is absolutely massive.
Right. 2 degrees might not sound like a lot to us on a summer day, but for a river ecosystem.
It is the difference between a stagnant dead zone and a thriving trout habitat. Cooler water holds significantly more dissolved oxygen. So by simply fixing the bank with trees instead of stone, you are actively restocking the river with fish and aquatic life.
But let's play the cynic for a second here. Cities are broke, municipal budgets are always tight everywhere. Is having happy fish really enough of a reason for a city council to overhaul their entire coastline strategy? Or is there a harder economic argument here that justifies the expense?
Oh, the economic argument is arguably much stronger than the environmental one. If you look at the real estate data in the report, it is incredibly compelling.
What are the numbers?
Proximity to a restored, accessible, natural shoreline boosts adjacent property values by 8 to 15%.
8 to 15%. That is a massive margin in a real estate market like Montreal. You are effectively generating huge amounts of future tax revenue just by planting trees.
You are taking what was a liability, a crumbling, ugly industrial ditch that probably smells like stagnant water, and you are turning it into a premium asset.
You're giving people a view.
A view, a park, a place to breathe, and it drives incredible foot traffic. The report estimates there are 7 million annual visits to these riverside parks, specifically citing places like Parc de la Promenade Bellerive and Parc René Lévesque.
7 million visits. That puts a local park in the same league as major global tourist attractions.
It really does. And think about the flow-on effect for local businesses. The report mentions the Verdun urban beach as a prime example of this.
Right, down on the southwest of the city.
Exactly. You put in a beach, you fix the shoreline, you make it clean and accessible. Suddenly, Wellington Street, which is the main commercial artery right nearby, sees this massive revitalization.
Because people go to the beach, they get hungry, they walk up the street to buy ice cream, they get dinner, they go shopping.
It becomes an economic engine for the whole borough.
And there's also the avoided cost aspect, specifically regarding floods. Because as we know, cleaning up after a flood is incredibly expensive.
That is the big one for the city budget. We know that extreme weather and flood events are getting more frequent. Now, concrete channels water. It traps it, it speeds it up, and it forces it somewhere else, usually into someone's basement.
Right.
But these bioengineered banks act like giant sponges. They create natural retention zones. So instead of spending tens of millions of dollars repairing flooded infrastructure and bailing out homeowners every single spring, you spend a fraction of that money up front on the green bank.
And the bank manages the water level naturally. It absorbs the shock.
It is pure risk management disguised as a public park.
That's a perfect way to put it. Now, we do have to address the elephant in the room here. Or perhaps, given the location, the polar bear in the room.
The winter.
Yes, the winter. This is Montreal. It is frozen solid, buried in snow and ice for 5 months of the year. We aren't talking about a sunny project in California here. Does this green infrastructure actually work when the world turns white?
That is always the very first question, the most common concern that traditional engineers have. Will the willows survive the freeze? Will the ice just rip it all out?
That's a valid question.
It is. But the report highlights that this system is designed specifically for the winter. It thrives in it.
How so? How does a plant beat ice?
Well, first it comes down to the plant selection. They use native willows and alders. These species are incredibly tough. They evolved in this exact climate. They can withstand being completely submerged in freezing water for months, and more importantly, they can withstand ice shove.
Ice shove. That just sounds violent.
It is incredibly violent. Ice shove is when the massive ice sheet on the river expands in the deep cold, and the current literally bulldozes that ice up onto the shoreline. It exerts massive, crushing lateral pressure against the bank.
Which sounds like a nightmare for a rigid wall.
It's a death sentence for concrete. A concrete wall is rigid. When millions of tons of ice push against it, the concrete has nowhere to go. It can't bend, so it just snaps. It fails.
But a bioengineered bank flexes.
Exactly. The soil and that dense root matrix absorb that lateral pressure. They bend under the weight of the ice without breaking. And then in the spring, when the ice melts, the branches just bounce right back.
So the flexibility of the plant is actually its greatest structural asset. It survives by yielding.
Exactly.
And in terms of how the city actually uses the space, they aren't just closing these parks down in November and waiting for May. The report mentions a four-season concept.
Right. They're actively trying to break that cultural habit of urban hibernation. They want the river to be a destination year-round, not just in July.
So what does a frozen river park look like in practice?
It looks like groomed cross-country skiing trails right along the restored bank. It's fat biking on the snow, snowshoeing trails. They're setting up these beautiful outdoor skating rinks that overlook the frozen river.
And they even put in warming stations, right? With fire pits?
Yes, warming stations so you can stay out longer.
So it's active land use. It's not just dead space waiting for summer to arrive.
It's a complete mentality shift. Instead of the river being this hostile, frozen edge of the city that you avoid in January because the wind is whipping off the concrete, it becomes a recreational hub. And interestingly, the mature vegetation actually acts as a windbreak, making it much more comfortable to be outside.
It really does seem like a comprehensive island-wide strategy.
Yeah.
When you zoom out, the scale is impressive. You have the Grand Parc de l'Ouest mentioned in the report, and I actually looked up the size of that. 3,000 hectares is enormous. That is bigger than many provincial and state parks.
It's actually Canada's largest municipal urban park. It's a massive commitment to protecting the wetlands in Pierrefonds-Roxborough and Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue.
And then you have these smaller targeted interventions too, like the Promenade de l'Anse-à-Lorme, restoring those fragile ecosystems, or the Plage de l'Est out in Pointe-aux-Trembles, which was a huge decontamination success story.
It feels like they are methodically trying to stitch the perimeter of the island back together with a green thread.
That's exactly the goal, to create this continuous, resilient, ecological belt all the way around Montreal. And what's really crucial here, the big takeaway from all this source material, is that Montreal is proving you don't have to choose between urban density and nature.
No, they're complementary.
You can have a thriving, dense, economically active city and a resilient, living shoreline. In fact, the argument the report makes is that to stay competitive, to keep citizens from fleeing to the suburbs, you actually need to offer these natural spaces.
It is the smartest long-term investment on the table right now. It solves the municipal drainage problem, it solves the urban heat problem, and it solves the aesthetic problem, all with the exact same budget.
It really reframes the whole development versus nature debate. We so often frame it as developers want to build and environmentalists want to protect. But in this case, nature is the development strategy. It protects the infrastructure and increases the land value simultaneously.
It's a win-win that actually works in practice, not just on paper.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to wrap up on today. You know, we spend billions of dollars globally developing high-tech composites and smart materials to build our cities. We want things that last forever, things that don't crack, materials that can self-repair.
We are always chasing the next miracle material in a lab.
Right. But it turns out, if you look at the shores of Montreal, the only technology that truly gets stronger with age, the only infrastructure that actually heals itself when it's damaged, has just been growing in the dirt for millions of years.
Sometimes the absolute most advanced engineering we have is just biology.
It's something for you to think about the next time you see a simple willow tree bending over the water. It is working a lot harder than you think. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into blue resilience.
See you next time.